A very well welcome to everyone today's webinar on converging solutions to a changing climate, mainstreaming resilience and nature-based solutions for business, finance and infrastructure. Today we will be joined by several experts from the Global Alliance for Water Adaptation, the Global Resilience Partnership, WWF, and the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Before jumping right in, we have a few housekeeping rules as we want to make this session as interactive as possible. As attendees, you're currently all on mute, but if you have any comments or questions, please let us know through the question box. And if you have any technical difficulties, please contact us directly. This webinar will be recorded and sent to you within the next week. And last but not least, we are all broadcasting from our homes, so please bear with us in case there are any technical hiccups. My name is Ramona Bettler, and I'm the events manager at South Pole and will be the host for today's webinar. Today, we will hear from several experts on how to scale up financing on nature-based solutions. I'm very excited to announce today's speakers. John Matthews is the Executive Director at the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation. Nathaniel Matthews is the Director of Programs at the Global Resilience Partnership. Sarah Travel is the Senior Sustainability Consultant at South Pole. Kieran Brand is the Bankable Lead for Fresh Water at WWF Netherlands. And last but not least, we have James Doughton, who will be facilitating our discussion and is the Director of IUCN's Global Water Program. Thank you very much to all of you for being here today and sharing your expertise with us. We have quite a dense program. We will open with a short scene setter from John Matthews at AGWA. Then we will have 3 case studies from the Global Resilience Partnership, South Pole, and WWF Netherlands. And then we will turn to you, the audience, to gather your reactions and questions and have a discussion before summarizing key insights from today and decide on next steps. Before handing over the mic to John, we would like to have a quick temperature check with you, the audience, and ask what you are thinking, and we'll have a first little poll with you. What does your organization need to mainstream nature-based solutions for future investment? More information on financial and non-financial returns, concrete investment opportunities, partners to co-invest with, more tailored internal engineering expertise, or better feasibility assessments. Let's wait a few more seconds before we close this poll. So I think the majority has given their answer, and what we can see is that the majority of you need more information on financial and non-financial returns, followed by concrete investment opportunities. So I hope we can give some more information, and with that, I'm happy to hand over to John.
Thanks very much. Ramona, will you be advancing the slides?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is John Matthews. I'm with AGWA, the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation, and I'd like to talk today to help set the larger scene, the set of issues that we're trying to address here in this session. And I'd like on this first slide to really focus on a number. How we get past 5% of investments in water, which seems to be the ceiling right now for how much we spend on water. Next slide, please. And a brand new report that just came out from the Department for International Development, the UK aid agency, through their K4D program, Knowledge for Development. It states NBS attract approximately 1 to 5% of investment in water security globally. This is a tiny amount of investment. And considering how much attention, even during Water Week at home this year, is focused on nature-based solutions, this is a remarkably small amount. Next slide, please. And my sense is that in many cases, when we talk about nature-based solutions, we're really doing this much more from an advocacy perspective and not really from an investment viewpoint. I maybe would like to frame this more casually as saying, how do we remove the BS from NBS? On Monday of this week, Lord Zach Goldsmith, he's the UK Environment Minister and the Minister for DFID, gave a formal statement in a session that said, quote, "Our recent research suggests that the odds are currently stacked against infrastructure investment in nature due to our procedures. And while now is the time to accelerate the use of nature-based solutions for water, we know it is no panacea to the water crisis. But we do need to rebalance the scales so that natural options are considered equally alongside traditional infrastructure." I think what he's really saying there is we need to make sure that this is a pretty level playing field, not that we need to push NBS for their own sake, but we need to make sure that they show up as credible options, and through that higher level transparency of efficacy, of more effective comparisons, we will have more green solutions. Next slide, please. Why so little finance for nature-based solutions? I have a few theories of my own. One is that is widely promoted is that we lack evidence of efficacy, and I would say that in most cases the usual response to that is, well, then we can wait for the science to tell us what we need to be doing in the future. A second very widespread view is that investors or lenders are not confident or familiar enough with NBS. Effectively, that there's low demand, that people aren't interested in fronting money in this space. Third one is that engineers aren't really developing enough NBS projects. Interestingly, that was the least chosen of the initial question. That's low supply, that just not enough projects are getting into the system. Fourth, we can't easily assign economic value to ecosystem services. Often the response here is, our organization has just produced the latest tool, and now you can do this correctly and effectively. And lastly, NBS projects are too small or too niche that investors don't really care. They're not interested because they're not going to get enough return for their investment. These are widespread. I'm sure that all of them sometimes are true, but I think that in most cases they don't necessarily add up. For the last point, for instance, one of the largest green bonds ever issued in the water sector came out just over a year ago from the Dutch State Treasury Agency, a sovereign bond in May of 2019 for 5 billion euros for Room for the River. The link there is to the criteria that were used to certify it. Next, please. Some alternative hypotheses, and in my experience over the last 12 or 13 years working in this space, these are some of the issues that I've encountered very often, that we have not really treated NBS as an administrative or a process issue. So we haven't thought about, in a particular institution, how they play out for processes around procurement, the specific methods for economic valuation and comparison of alternative approaches for many types of investment, the lifespan analysis, so how long the project lasts and how it will perform over that lifetime, and especially for when we have multi-purpose rather than narrowly defined or single purpose investments. A second issue that I've seen personally quite a bit is that NBS should not be treated as a separate agenda, that they're often they're strongest when we try to align them with broader agendas such as climate adaptation, disaster risk reduction, WASH, and agriculture. So if we work within existing larger issues that are already often more well developed. Certainly, the last one I think is extremely widespread. We need to make trade-offs more clear and transparent. The publication on the right, which came out last fall, Nate Matthews, who's on this call as well as one of the co-authors, along with myself and a colleague at TNC, published a piece that is specifically on point 2, trying to align NBS with climate adaptation and WASH. Next slide, please. An example, a very tangible example of what I'm talking about. In the next few weeks, we should be publishing with the Asian Development Bank, Practitioner's Guide to Nature-Based Solutions. This has been in development for about 2 years. It's tied directly to internal ADB processes. It aligns with internal ADB program priorities, such as climate adaptation and DRR. And it's based on an approach that focuses on the needs, really using a kind of ethnographic approach to interview and discuss with ADB staff. And their portfolio altogether is just shy, in water alone, is just shy of $2 billion US last year across the full Asia Pacific region. Next slide, please. My parting thought to you is, what if we could design a seawall that could heal itself? And we can. It's called a sand dune. This is a quote from a good friend of mine, Brian Bloodsoe, a researcher and engineer at the University of Georgia. Thanks very much. Next slide, please. I'm grateful for your attention, and I look forward to listening to the other speakers and to your own questions.
Hi, hello everyone, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're calling in from. I'm Nathaniel Matthews with the Global Resilience Partnership and the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance. I'm pleased to be joining you today, as you can see from the outside, which is seems to be appropriate since we're talking about nature-based solutions. Now, AURA, as we call it, is a multi-sector collaboration designed to drive 500 million of investment into coastal natural capital by pioneering groundbreaking finance products that incentivize blended finance and private investment into vulnerable regions. Next slide, please. So I won't go too much here into the context, but a couple of these numbers really stand out. The first is that with sea level rise and population density projections, it looks like around 800 million people will be at risk from coastal flooding and storm surges by 2050. You know, in the last 10 years, insurers alone have paid out more than 300 billion for coastal storm surges. And really we can see that, you know, the protection gap here is very wide, and it's in all of our interests to close it. And the private financing for adaptation and resilience is still under leveraged. Yet, as John mentioned, private investment capital is available. Next slide, please. So John touched on some of these barriers, but I'd just like to highlight what we've identified as some of the barriers as well. And when we're thinking about, you know, coastal natural capital, we're also trying to shift the idea of thinking about water risks from the land, which we typically think of them, and more shifting the perspective is looking from the ocean towards the land and really ensuring that we connect up a holistic perspective of source to sea. But we identified a number of current barriers. So the first one being obviously a lack of understanding how investing in natural capital can provide a timely and productive return. This relates to some of the answers that you all provided on the survey. Thinking about a limited pipeline of really risk-adjusted investable products. Insufficient data and modeling, the gap is definitely being closed there, but when we think about ocean-derived risks, that is a wider gap in some instances. Inadequate enabling policies to really shift investment away from unsustainable infrastructure. So again, we still see a lot of investment going in traditional gray, or as a good colleague, Hankovic calls it, stupid infrastructure. And really that sort of set pathway of money going into that. instead of actually thinking about more sustainable options, as John's final quote noted there, like sand dunes. And this apparent need for investment returns to be available in the short time period. And I think that may be shifting. We may see an opportunity there with COVID, where we see less returns from higher stakes and people looking for more stable options. So that fifth one may be shifting. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, Aura is a multi-sector alliance. We have 3 priorities. It was just launched last year and we're just kicking off the activities now, but we work in practice and innovation, science and research, and policy and governance. And we try to bring investments in scalable projects together with the latest science and research and inform and advance ocean resilience policy. Next slide, please. So just to put that into something a bit more concrete, some of the projects that we're investing in from this fall include looking at blue carbon resilience credits. So we're working with the Nature Conservancy and AXA XL to develop a tradable credits that value the combined carbon sequestration and coastal protection resilience benefits of coastal wetlands. We're looking at things like coral reef insurance. So how can we scale parametric insurance products for coral reefs to actually fund the maintenance and restorations efforts after tropical cyclone events? What we found is that during tropical cyclones, coral reefs are often damaged, and if we clean them up almost immediately following a cyclone, they can recover quite quickly. But if that damage is left, it has long-term implications. And then we're also looking from the science and research side in things like the Ocean Risk Index, where we create an index to determine the costs to economies from the loss of natural capital, and how do we identify finance and policy options to minimize these risks. But I would say that as a whole, when we're looking at coastal resilience, I can count on one hand about 5 options that we can really invest in. So what we're also running from this fall, from October, we'll be launching an innovation competition looking for new ideas to support in the coastal resilience space and to reduce ocean risk. So please keep an eye out for that. Please, next slide. So just to conclude, Aura, as I've mentioned, is a multi-sector alliance. To date, we've received seed funding from the Canadian government of $2.5 million to start the alliance. We have all of these partners here on board, as well as a number of observers, including the G7, Fiji, and other organizations like the Global Island Partnership. And I would just say watch this space. We're really looking to find new ways in reducing ocean risk and building coastal resilience. And we're also looking for your help with that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Nate and John and Ramona, for that introduction. So my name is Sarah Traubel, and I'll be presenting to you a brief case study and our experience from South Pole on nature-based solutions and the case for landscape level approaches and financing. Before I do that, I would just dive quickly into a brief introduction of South Pole for those of us who don't, for those of you who don't know us. So we're a leading project developer as well as a recognized advisor on climate action, and we do that for private companies, but also the public sector and investors. We started in 2006. We now have 18 offices and over 300 experts across the globe, and you can see here on the slide a bit of the impact that we were able to generate through our projects. And today, I wanted to start off by framing a little bit our experience in terms of how nature-based solutions have sort of rank in terms of options within corporates. So what you see on the left, on the left side of the screen here, is the results of a study that we conducted with CDP in 2018. Evaluating the use of nature-based solutions versus gray solutions. And so you can clearly see that nature-based solutions are a preferred option of use for companies. So they are indeed gaining traction. Nevertheless, on the other hand, we have, of course, and many of you are aware of this, the nature loss posing increasing threat to companies. So more of 50% of the world's GDP exposed to nature loss, and three sectors being particularly exposed to that, and that's listed on the slide here. So I think all in all, we can safely say that there's a clear case to scale up NBS and address nature loss as a way for companies to become climate resilient and also remain prosperous. And just to illustrate a little bit more what we've been seeing is, so I'm just going to present two brief examples. So one pertaining to a cotton growing region in China linked to caring, which was faced with a triple challenge on water. So one was severe water scarcity, then also severe soil degradation and erosion, and then also the fact that we're dealing with an important water-related areas with wells and streams that need to be protected. So what was implemented here were windbreaks and increased soil organic matter to improve the soil water storage, which also had co-benefits for biodiversity, and down the line could also have the potential of reducing the need for agrochemicals. And to note here is the cotton in this particular region, cotton is a key crop. So basically it just sort of highlights again the need for a landscape, the landscape-based solution to address the challenges in the entire landscape. The second example I'd like to mention is in Indonesia, excuse me. And here we're talking about a supply chain concession that is linked to L'Oréal's supply chain. And again, here where it's a situation where there's severe land degradation from a former peatland that was drained, illegally drained, and then subsequently degraded due to burning for agricultural land conversion. And so what was implemented here is a peatland re-wetting program, which has very important mitigation and adaptation benefits. So, for example, that its function as a carbon sink only in 2017 has yielded 32,000 tons of CO2 equivalent of carbon that was kept in the ground. In terms of adaptation, also very important, the re-wetting helps prevent fires and flooding due to changes in El Nino or La Nina cycles. And all of this was also co-implemented with trainings for local village communities on fire prevention, hydrological management, and sustainable farming practices. And again, here, I mean, it's very evident to see that, you know, such solutions won't be successful unless they are implemented at a landscape level. And then from a conceptual point of view, what do we even mean when we look at a landscape, and how would we come to actually identifying concrete projects and investment opportunities? So what's very important is to identify those common risks and challenges, and then engaging with the different stakeholders, building their knowledge and capacity as and when that is not already there, and then moving into concrete investment opportunities. And all of this with a view of de-risking the landscape at large in terms of making sure that the most important risk for all stakeholders are addressed. So just to bring this home a bit in terms of one example that we have to show from South Pole is the Landscape Resilience Fund, which is a fund that creates a pipeline of bankable NBS projects that are embedded in a sustainable landscape approach. So here there's a very clear focus on adaptation and climate resilience in terms of encouraging beneficiaries to adapt their practices to a changing climate. So here, various stakeholders from public sector, philanthropies, and companies can provide grants into the fund and can get in return a quantified impact around for example, the land conserved or jobs created, etc. And in turn, this fund will provide soft loans for SMEs and also technical assistance to scale up bankable projects, and all of this with a view of being integrated in a landscape. This fund came about as part of the Jeff Challenge Fund together with WWF USA, and is currently will be launched at the end of this year, and due diligence is going on. And at the start of next year, new investors will be sought and new investment cases as well. And this is one example of the types of funds that we're part of creating, sometimes also bespoke funds for specific corporates. We'll be happy to give you more information if you're interested, but I think I'm going to leave it here. And I think we have another question. Exactly.
Yes, perfect. Thank you very much. So our second question is, in the context of COVID-19, do you expect the opportunities for bankable nature-based solution investments to increase exponentially, to increase as before of COVID-19, to stay the same, to decrease, or is it too early to say? So let's give everyone a little bit more time to submit their answers. So I think the majority has submitted their answers, and let's show the results. So the results are very spread out. So I think this means it's too early to say, or yeah, but very interesting. And I'll let the next speaker comment the results.
Hi all, thank you for this opportunity to be speaking today, and welcome everyone. My name is Kieran Brandt and I'm from WWF Netherlands and I'm part of the Green Finance Unit. I just want to have a quick discussion around the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development today to let you know one of the tools that we are using in order to go and support NBS in the landscapes and how it will actually work. So next slide, please. So part of setting up the DFCD, we really went and started focusing on all of the issues that we've covered today. And the lack of pipeline is definitely something that comes up quite often. And when we went and investigated, we really started at that landscape level and started to identify the reason that these investments are not being made, and very importantly, what we can do in order to go and catalyze more investments in these landscapes. Next slide, please. What this yielded was a very nice consortium of 4 organizations that have set up 3 facilities. We have WWF and SNV that are supporting the origination facility. These are the 2 NGOs that form this origination piece. We have the water facility, which has been set up by the Climate Fund Manager Group. They will be looking after all the water-related investments. And then we have FMO, the Dutch Development Bank, that have set up the land use facility, and they'll be looking at all of the land use facility projects. What we do is we really start with that integrated landscape approach to really start to understand the landscape and really go and start looking at what kind of interventions and solutions we can go apply at that landscape. And then we start to progress those solutions up to the project level to eventually go and yield an investment. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, we can go back one. There's 4 themes that we're focusing on in DFCD. Water and sanitation and environmental protection projects will go to the water facility, and forestry and agricultural type projects will go to the land use facility. And the origination facility, which is by WWF and SNV, they'll be the ones originating and supporting these projects from that idea stage to that investable stage. And so that will go and cut across these 2 facilities, and then we'll yield in one of them taking it on. Next slide, please. As a geographic focus, DFCD is focusing on all the OECD DAC countries with a strong focus on LDC and Dutch priority region countries. And so you'll see it's quite a broad approach when it comes to this. And WWF is looking at 10 countries and 10 landscapes at the moment where we are deploying DFCD. And we're going to be expanding that over the next 2 to 3 years. Next slide, please. What our overall impact is that we're going to try start building these climate resilient economic growth in these developing countries using that landscape or basin approach. And our outcomes are looking at lowering GHG emissions and building climate resilient land use and ecosystems, water supply and sanitations, and then food security. And these will be the KPIs that will be mapping our progress and our and how we advance through the different facilities. And overall, this is really where we're going to see our impact. Actually identifying this impact and defining this impact is also something that we're trying to explore, especially from a biodiversity perspective. How can we go and link biodiversity impacts to these bankable projects? And then obviously looking at the landscape level to go and really go and downscale each of these things to that project level. Next slide, please. From the landscape piece, we start with really looking at the landscape and identifying that landscape, and then supplying grants in order to go and start looking at different studies that need to be done in that landscape to really go and understand it. We'll be engaging the different stakeholders through multi-stakeholder platforms or setting up multi-stakeholder platforms. We'll be scanning for bankable and non-bankable interventions in order to go and de-risk and support this landscape. And then we'll also be looking at what kind of activities on the landscape level we can continue to do in order to go and support these projects from being identified and funded. In the second year, we'll really start looking at the enabling environment, so from a governance, policy, and additional action perspective. And importantly, part of this process, we really will be leveraging all the tools that exist in our network and outside, like the water risk filter, in order for us to understand the landscape well enough to really start to decide whether these interventions or solutions are positive or negative and whether they work within that landscape context. Next slide, please. Once we start to identify solutions, we can then start applying them to our pipeline or our bankable process. Obviously, it starts off with that landscape approach, but then we go to that idea stage, which is stage 0, where we start looking at the different ideas and start to identify whether these ideas look like they're feasible or not. We will then graduate these ideas through our different pipelines in order to go and get them to a point, which is at stage 2 develop, which is really a pre-feasibility or an investor proposal type level, where we will go and start to hand these projects over to either the water facility or the land use facility. We have grants and TA available for these projects to be identified and progressed through those different phases. And we also really need to go and bring in the right experts, whether it's solar experts, whether it's NBS experts, in order to go and get the right technical expertise and the right financial expertise behind these projects in order to get them to that bankable or fundable state. Next slide, please. What we're hoping is that on that landscape level, we're going to be looking at multiple projects, some of which will not progress to that stage 3 level. Some of them might progress to a level and then get passed over to different funds and facilities. But with all of these projects, we need to go and start taking these ideas and working them through that different pipeline in order to go and understand, are they bankable? Are they actually unlocking the right impact from an environmental and a social perspective? And are they a good fit for DFCD? And so we'll be having a lot of projects. Some of them will be migrated out. Some of them will become non-bankable projects and start looking for grants and donor money. But these are the different processes and phases that will go in order to go and really understand what's possible and what is bankable in this landscape. And through this, we'll also start to identify which projects need to happen first in order to go and unlock further projects down the line, especially when it comes to that grant and policy perspective. What kind of what kind of policy and regulation needs to be in place in order to go and make these bankable projects a success in the future. Next slide, please. One of the publications that we've released recently is this Bankable Nature Solution Blueprint Guide. And this goes and documents about 13 case studies that show what's possible in this space. And they cover all the different themes within DFCD and also some extra ones, just really start to inspire our officers and our network, as well as the external developers and financiers, of what is possible and what we can potentially start to look at actually implementing in our own landscapes and our own basins. This guide goes through that whole BNS process and understanding, and then gets to the point where we start looking at different lessons that we've learned from it, and building those partnerships, building those networks is really one of the key lessons that came out of it, and engaging the stakeholders on the ground, but also really going and bringing in that technical expertise and that technical support wherever it is located in the world is really key in order to go and get these solutions implemented and off the ground in the landscape context. Next slide, please. So for more information, you can go to the dfcd.com to go and see how external projects can start accessing DFCD, since this is a consortium of groups. FMO is the lead consortium member, and WBF is one of the partners, and we have our own process, which I've showed now. But there are many ways that you could access DFCD if anyone is interested. But we are really starting to try build this bankable approach and bankable pipeline within our network, and then also go and share all these learnings around that to our internal groups and external groups. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the questions later, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you very much. Then let's get started with the next question. What do we all need to do collectively to accelerate the momentum? Create another fund, more visibility of available investment opportunities, more availability of de-risking capital, more mainstream investor buy-in, or do we need to push investors to add nature-based solutions to their portfolio and for them to therefore manage the risk? And please don't forget, after this we will start our Q&A, so submit your questions through the question box. A few more seconds so everyone can log in the answers, but I think we have reached the end, and let's look at the results. So I think the majority of people want to have more visibility of the available investment opportunities, as well as there seems to be the need for a push towards investors to add nature-based solutions to their portfolio so they can manage the risk. Thank you very much, and with that I'll hand over to the Q&A.
Great, thank you, Ramona, for that. We're going to be pressed for time, but that's fine because we've had four fantastic presentations from the panel. And to kick us off, I'd like to just sort of go back to something that you mentioned, John, the fact that there are a series of things that were limiting progress, and Kieran mentioned them as well. And so in many ways, we might be facing a situation with nature-based solutions investment that's similar to where we were in 2005 with climate change. Not enough evidence, wait for scientists and engineers to tell us what to do, and a slight sort of nervous market, if you like, in terms of investing. And yet we're seeing some really great examples coming through. How can we get those moving and accelerated with the public sector? If you think that the public sector is a key element in understanding and opening the market for adapting to climate change, what does the public sector need to do to really help scale and grow the momentum around some of the excellent examples we've seen? And I wondered, John, if you had any perspectives on that.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking, James. I think it's a great question. Where I see the public sector in most cases leading this space is really traditionally they have made a decision for a particular project at the outset that we are going to make it something that has a green component. What I see, however, that's shifting in some cases right now, I'm thinking of an example in northern Thailand, a city there, Udon Thani, the second largest city in Thailand. They tried to reframe the problem that they were facing. They were looking at water shortages for the energy sector and for rice irrigators, and they were at the same time dealing with urban flooding issues or urban stormwater issues. They decided, instead of treating these as isolated problems as they have in the past, to say, let's lump all of these problems together in a more integrated, a more holistic approach. Let's try some multifunction, multi-purpose approaches. And that's actually where green infrastructure shines. And so, whereas originally they were thinking about a bunch of gray interventions, they ended up coming with just one or two really significant green approaches. And I think that really reflects the strength of the public sector too, by including many different stakeholders, and when you do that, when you redefine the problem in a broader sense, in a non-traditional way, then I think people in many countries, developed and developing, really see the advantages of NBS.
Great, thanks, John. So by looking at the problem with a different sense of scale, so therefore you're also able to mobilize solutions at a different sense of scale. So we've got some questions coming in. I've got one here addressed to Kieran. And that question is, what are the major criteria that you use to evaluate whether a project will be bankable or not? I realize that's quite deep, but I wondered if there's anything that you could give us there in terms of top line response to that.
Thank you, and also a very, very good question. And it is something that we really need to go through that whole process to understand. In the beginning, these ideas are very high level. There's a very low chance of bankability and a very low chance of the right impact. And putting them through that whole process and really putting grants and technical assistance support behind each of them to really go and unlock that bankability and go and unlock that impact from an environmental and a social perspective. Once we get to the stage 2 level where we hand over to our investors, they will then go and map that out to our criteria to really go and understand how big is the ticket size, what kind of impacts are we looking at, are the safeguards in place, can we do a KYC check on all the partners involved, and by then we'll be able to really have that financial and impact view of these projects. And we really need to have the grants and TA support to go and get them to that level. On the dfd.com, you do have the criteria for it, but we also really need to understand that it takes time to get to that level where you have that idea of how bankable something is, and we have grants and TA for that.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, we are getting very short on time, so I'm going to maybe squeeze in one more. One of the implications of this is that nature-based solutions work with local communities, multiple stakeholders at different scales, and that raises challenges around land tenure, land governance, inclusivity, and access to resources. And I wondered if any of the panelists had any perspectives on that in terms of your work and your experiences to date. Does anybody want to kick us off with that?
I could jump in, James, just to briefly mention that, I think when we think about nature-based solutions, we think about them as resilient. And one of the key attributes of resilience is thinking about inclusivity and equity. And so, I think these issues of land tenure and bringing people into the decision-making process, if we do this legitimately, they take a lot more time and they can be more expensive, but over the long term, we recognize them to be more resilient solutions. And I think that given the uncertainties we're facing, both from climate change and from other factors like what we're seeing now with COVID, it's shown the fragility that we have within more traditional infrastructure and the really need for resilient solutions. So I think it emphasizes that need for inclusivity and equity in these solutions.
Great, thanks very much, Nate. Thanks to all of you. Unfortunately, we're going to run out of time because we're on such a short timeline with these sessions, but thank you for the questions coming in from everybody. And I'll now hand over to John.
Thank you very much. I have been asked to provide a sense of next steps and to encapsulate some of the themes that emerged from this session. I noticed in my hearing from all the talks a number of interesting themes. At the outset, I think we were really challenged. Are NBS an accident, or are they consistent and persistent type of outcome, and how we think about water management, water solutions, engaging with the broader water community and our investments. And I feel like there were really three transitions that I heard. One was a shift from talking about projects, NBS projects, to landscapes. That term landscape appeared in every talk, and I think that's really important. It's thinking much larger than individual projects, and thinking about how we actually work with not just one ecosystem, but how ecosystems are interacting, that ecosystems and those landscape level processes are in effect a type of infrastructure. That's a very significant advance in thinking. One is a second point is what I would call a shift from magical thinking to practical thinking. We've had a lot of mythology around NBS historically, and in all of the talks from Sarah talking about how corporations and businesses are actually pretty widespread in their use of NBS now as a type of a water intervention, to thinking about investment vehicles such as Nate raised, or even creating new investment systems and project development systems, such as Kieran mentioned. Very, very interesting types of approaches. And then the last is really, are these issues special or are they normal? And I think here we still see a lot of struggle, actually. And maybe the key word that I heard also from every speaker was the word resilient. In my experience, I've been working in climate change and water issues for over a dozen years. Resilience is a word that only goes back in the water community about 3 years, but it has shifted from being a kind of elegant variation to how we think about climate adaptation to actually a new kind of aspirational quality that we're trying to move towards, and that we need to actually measure different things. We need to invest in different things in order to achieve resilience, that it's a specific quality that we use to evaluate. And gray infrastructure, stupid infrastructure, as Nate said, may not be that resilient in many cases, but there is an emergent, resilient property that comes from NBS. And that, I think, is ultimately what we're seeking to be able to invest in through these processes. As a final thought, I want to thank Sarah for really taking the lead and organizing all of this, to Ramona for acting as our moderator and handling all the technical issues, to my fellow speakers, and lastly to you, the audience, for attending. We've placed all of our email addresses here. We really would love to have you reach out to us. And if you registered for this session, then we will send you an email within a week that will allow you to see us again if you wish, and be able to continue the conversation. Thanks very much.